So thank you all very much for joining us tonight for the third and final installment of the National River Watershed Association's 2026 Waters Journey Series. The NRWA, or National River Watershed Association, for those who don't know, is a nonprofit environmental organization that operates in 31 communities in southern New Hampshire and north central Massachusetts. We specialize in water and land protection, climate resilience projects, and environmental education, including tonight's program. Much of our work is supported by generous members and donors. So we encourage anybody who is here tonight who isn't already a member or donor to check out the NRWA website and see our work for yourselves. The presentation you're about to see is the third in a series of three hydrology lectures. The series began back in February 5th with a lesson by the hydrologist Dave Armstrong, who's here tonight. That one was titled Hydrology 101, and Dave gave us an in-depth look at the hydrological cycle and water's journey throughout the watershed. In our second speaker in the series was engineer Sarah Whiting, also here tonight, who led a wonderful talk on March 5th about the effects of climate change in our region and other human impacts on natural hydrology. Both these presentations were fantastic, and they were followed by a lively question and answer sessions. They're also both recorded and available on our website, as well as the NRWA YouTube channel. So I encourage you guys that haven't seen those already to check that out as well. Tonight, we've gathered to listen to two very talented speakers as well, who will describe the ways in which people can have a positive impact on the environment through protection and restoration of the natural hydrological cycle. So our first speaker tonight is going to be Bob Pine. He's a resident of Groton, Massachusetts, and a principal and founder of Pine and Swallow Environmental. As an engineer and landscape architect, he has worked on a lot of major landscape projects throughout the United States and around the world. He's also a fellow at the American Society of Landscape Architects. Um, some more about Bob. He also served as a trustee for the Groton Conservation Trust. I think he's been there since 1977. He was a longtime National River Watershed Association board member, is the chair of the nominating committee for the Squanisit and Petapawag areas of critical environmental concern here in the watershed, and he serves on numerous town of Groton boards and committees. Our other speaker tonight, who you'll hear second, is the soil scientist Ralph Baker. Ralph serves on the National River Watershed Association's board of directors as our board president. Prior to his retirement in 2015, he co-founded and served as CEO, chairman, and chief scientist of the firm Terraform. That organization was an environmental remediation firm that designed and completed in situ thermal technologies to clean up toxic organic pollution in soil and groundwater. During his 45-year career as an environmental scientist, he has also authored over 90 technical publications and 4 books. A resident of Fitchburg, Massachusetts, Ralph is co-lead of the Fitchburg Trail Stewards and served for 5 years as a member of the Fitchburg Conservation Commission. Ralph is also an avid naturalist, cyclist, hiker, and backcountry skier. So we're going to get started with our talk in just a moment. So while the speakers are presenting, feel free to type your questions into the chat on the side of your Zoom window, which we can address and go back to during the Q&A session towards the end of tonight's gathering. Alternatively, if you want to save your questions until the end of the speaker's presentation, you can raise your hand after both Bob and Ralph have finished talking, and we can call on you and you can ask them aloud. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Bob, who will begin tonight's talk with an introduction to the concept of nature-based solutions.
Thanks, Ryan, and good evening, everyone. I am going to talk about what nature-based solutions are and why they matter. And then Ralph will talk about a number of examples of these that are throughout the watershed. Ryan, I'm not going down. It's not responding to my clicks here.
Okay. Have you clicked off the Zoom section and gone to your, well, I guess you're already sharing your screen.
Oh, okay.
Bob, on the lower left, you can see a right arrow. If you click on that, it'll advance your slide.
Okay.
Oh yeah, try the other arrow on the lower right. I'm sorry, lower left, but on the right-hand side of all those.
There you
Great.
go.
All right. All right. Thank you. Off to a running start here. So we're going to start with a little terminology. Nature-based solutions are natural systems to address climate impacts such as flooding, drought, and loss of biodiversity. Uh, Basically, the Earth has been going through impacts for millions and millions of years, and it has responded in certain ways. And if you look at those, there are lessons to be learned. And that's what nature-based solutions are, is looking at nature, understanding how those systems work. And it turns out they're really effective in terms of dealing with impacts today. Another term that you should be aware of is green infrastructure. This is a term that refers to engineered nature-based solution storm management systems, but unfortunately, it has become used almost interchangeably, sometimes with nature-based solutions. So you may see it misused in that way, but technically it should refer to engineered stormwater systems that are nature-based solutions. The other term is gray infrastructure. This applies to the traditional engineering of pipes and catch basins that don't treat things and are not nature-based solutions. It happens, however, that there's been an evolution in those engineered solutions, and many of them include nature-based solutions. And in fact, if you're in Massachusetts, which is promoting nature-based solutions, if you want to apply for a grant, you need to look at whether a nature-based solution is better than your engineered solution or see about including nature-based solutions with it. Because when you do that, you reduce the costs of the engineered systems. So in order to use nature-based solutions, you need to categorize what they are dealing with, the impacts. So there are, of course, hundreds of impacts, but the Climate Impact Committee of the National Watershed debated this, considered this, and for our watershed, came up with six impacts that we think are the most important and the most useful. And then we also include a category for carbon, which is in our overarching consideration in all impacts that are climate change. So the first impact is flooding. Um, and in the lower left, there's a diagram that actually Sarah showed, but I want to show it again because it's really just so important to understand this. As you look at the country, you can see that in the Northeast, the heaviest downpours have increased by 60% basically in the last 60 years. That's an absolutely stunning number. Uh, when you traditionally, we've looked at flooding in terms of 1 to 3 day storms that build up. But what we're seeing now are these intense storms, and Leominster being the perfect example of this. Just 3 years ago, they had 11 inches of rain in 5 hours. That's just not heard of. I mean, we never even conceived of that kind of a number, and our infrastructure isn't designed to handle it. So the terminology that has developed around that is calling these flash flooding as opposed to long-term flooding. The second impact is droughts. And this is similar. Droughts traditionally have been 2, 3, 4 year reductions in the amount of rainfall that's occurring. But what we're seeing now in some years, and supposedly we will see them much more frequently in the future, are summer periods when there is virtually no rain, and since temperatures are going up, we will be having multiple 90-degree plus days, and that combination will dry up wetlands and streams and reduce dramatically the flow in the rivers. So this is a very serious impact as well. The third is simply rising temperatures. In particular, the number of 90-degree days is going up. And of course, cities are the most affected. The fourth category is degraded water resources. This is due to increased erosion because of the increased storms. That erosion is carrying sediments into the rivers and streams and nutrients. And the nutrients are then causing algae blooms and other problems. Also, the increased flow in the rivers when these storms occur causes scour, which affects the bottom of the rivers, and these drought periods for streams and wetlands in particular, but also for the major rivers, dries them up. And that can be a very serious problem. The fifth category is degraded landscapes. And many of the plant materials that have been very happy here for just hundreds of years aren't able to tolerate the changes in temperatures that are going on. And a classic example of this is maple trees. Maples can no longer compete in forests because the oaks and hickories, which are just to our south, are migrating north because the warmer temperatures makes it more attractive for them, and they're out competing the maples. Also, the presence of invasives is degrading our landscapes. And the sixth is loss of biodiversity. And this is really an awful thing that's going on. We still see lots of animals, but if you really go in and find out what's going on, some species are really having difficulties. And it's due in part to the rising temperatures that are affecting the landscapes. The habitat that they need is changing, and they're not able to migrate because our roads and development blocks the routes. Changes in seasons is affecting things. And then the last category is carbon loss. This is driving all of the ones that are above. And so we included a category because a lot of nature-based solutions happen to deal also with carbon. So this is a chart that I love this chart. And you can find this chart on the National Watershed's website, except it's in one chart, not two. I divided it into two parts to put on the screen because if I did it in one, the words would be too small to read. But this tells a lot. These charts along the top have these six impact categories plus carbon. And on the left side of each of these is a list of nature-based solutions. And what is just really important to understand here, if you do a nature-based solution and you design it for flooding, say bioswales at the top, and you want to reduce flooding, well, it's also going to affect droughts, and I'll explain that more in a little while here. And it's also going to help with degraded water resources. And it's also going to help with degraded landscapes. And as you go down the chart, you can see all of these interrelationships. And that is important in when you do these kinds of strategies. you're having a much broader effect than just dealing with one impact at a time. You're dealing with multiple ones, and that in turn teaches you about the nature of climate impacts. The climate impacts aren't just one thing and one another thing. They are affecting a broad base of things. And in order to effectively deal with that, we need to deal with multiple issues at the same time. And that's why nature-based solutions can become so important. Another I just want to point out is lawn to meadow conversion. Here again, uh, it will affect flooding as a second. I forgot to mention the grays are secondary benefits. The greens are primary benefits. A lot of the whites have sort of tertiary benefits, but we're not. We just fill up the whole chart then. So as you go across each of these, there are all these things that you're also affecting. So I want to talk briefly about lawn to meadow conversion because this is something you can do in your backyard. And it happens to have a whole set of really important benefits.
Well, you
Uh,
can. I-
yes? Oh, okay. It reduces flooding because water can infiltrate much better in a meadow area than in a lawn because the kinds of plants have deep roots and they open up the soil. In droughts, the native grasses and wildflowers have adapted to drought conditions, so they are still functioning and available to birds and insects. Degraded landscapes. This is in creating a whole habitat for out of a lawn, which really doesn't serve our biodiversity very well. And it has insects, birds, all kinds of critters are there. So loss of biodiversity we're dealing with in also way. And as again, I'll describe in a while, it actually takes carbon out of the air and puts it into the soil. So you're doing all these things by making that kind of a change. So I want to talk about two things that are sort of threaded through all of these uh, nature-based solutions, but not named in any of them, but happens to be a critical thing in a lot of them. And that's infiltration. And all of the blue dots that just came up are nature-based solutions that include infiltration. So uh, it happens that 20 out of the 29 nature-based solutions that are here have infiltration as part of what they're doing. So this diagram shows the difference between a natural environment and a city environment. Obviously, we don't have city environments, but it shows the extremes here. And that with a natural environment, you typically have about 10% runoff for a heavy storm. In a developed landscape, you can have up to 55% runoff. You will have 50% infiltration in the natural environment and down to 15% in the more developed. So doing something about infiltration is important in offsetting those impacts. These are not just climate impacts, but human impacts we're talking about here. So that those that are creating infiltration, those 20 with the blue dots, they reduce runoff and therefore flooding. It provides natural irrigation. And as water infiltrates the ground, the larger particles are filtered out, and that includes a lot of the pollutants that are attached to those particles. And a lot of the pollutants then attach to particles in the ground. In particular, phosphorus will bind to soil particles. And phosphorus is a critical aspect of what causes algae blooms. If you have too much phosphorus in the ground, you will, in the water, you will almost always have algae blooms. So cleansing the water is an important aspect. And this is another diagram that I love here. This tells the whole story about what is really going on here. When you infiltrate water, the diagram showed some of it is considered shallow water. That's water that is then used by plants. But the deeper water goes down to the water table, and it increases the reservoir of water that is in the ground. And that reservoir is flowing, and is flowing toward the low areas. And in the low areas, there are wetlands, streams, and rivers. So this whole process, as you infiltrate the water, you're cleansing it, you're cooling it, what's in the ground, because the temperature in the ground is about 55 degrees. So when it reaches the streams and rivers, you have pure water and cool water coming in. And in the periods of drought, if you have increased that reservoir of water, you have a supply of water going into the streams and the wetlands and the rivers in that critical time when they're losing their water due to the drought. So the other thing I want to talk about that's sort of threaded through those impacts of those nature-based solutions are trees and forests. And this diagram on the left shows the carbon cycle, which is much more complex than most people think of it. Trees are just amazing part of our landscape. They take carbon in. Now, people usually think in terms of the carbon storage of a tree as the mass of the tree. The trunk and then the limbs are organic matter. 58% of organic matter is carbon. So you're storing carbon in the tree. But there's a much more complex and wonderful system going on, because the carbon that the tree takes in, it then sends down to its roots. And with a healthy soil, the roots then send that carbon to mycorrhiza fungi, which sends it into the soil where there are microbes that take it and start to transform it. And A, they feed on it, but B, they transform it into nutrients that they send back to the mycorrhiza fungi, back to the roots, back to the tree, and that's what's making the tree grow in a healthy way. They're also depositing organic matter and carbon directly into the soil and binding it to soil particles. So you're storing carbon in the soil, and there's a vast amount of carbon that's being stored in the soil. And this is going on a smaller scale with other plants, and in particular meadows. On the grasses, the natural grasses, the wildflowers evolved in a way that they are also taking in carbon, putting it into the ground, and developing the soil. So you're getting better soil, you're getting a better way to support plantings. There's a whole system here that is very beneficial. And a particular example of that, or the sort of the ultimate example of that, is with old growth forests, or forests with old growth characteristics. And when a forest has been harvested, it typically grows back with primarily trees of the same age. In an old growth forest, you have old trees, mid-year trees, young trees. You have plants material growing in the mid heights of the forest. You have ground covers. And therefore, you have a whole myriad of habitat niches. And that in turn, with this sort of, I'll call it a crisis going on with biodiversity, the birds and the animals can often find habitat where they can survive in this type of a forest, whereas in a younger forest or other places, they can't find the kinds of habitat they need. But this is such a beneficial area that it is really a place that's important to allow to happen. The last thing I want to talk about is costs. Most of these nature-based solutions are less expensive than engineered solutions to accomplish the same things. And there have been a lot of studies that a lot of the studies have been on much larger scale projects than we're talking about in our region, but it still tells the same story. And in particular, there was a very wonderful study done by Marta Vicarelli of UMass Amherst, looking at comparing nature-based solutions versus engineering solution costs around the world. And the vast majority of these came out cheaper for the nature-based solutions. And a lot of those studies, in turn, were financed by the World Bank because the World Bank is out there lending money in ways to reduce disaster risk. And they want the most cost-effective strategies to be done. And what they're determining is that these nature-based solutions are often much more effective and much cheaper than other ways that they have been traditionally spending money. So there's a lot of good things going on here. Um, Before I conclude and hand this off, I want to also make kind of a general observation that's for me and for others. Uh, Over the last year and a quarter in particular, it's been hard to watch as things that we have worked on for years, decades, sometimes multiple decades, are being obliterated with a stroke of the pen. And sometimes this can seem like dark times. But if you look around, there are a lot of lights all around us. All of the environmental organizations in our region, all of the land trusts, all of the regional organizations like the National River Watershed Association are, to me, and I hope to everyone else here, like bright lights in this environment, that we are still doing the work of protecting the environment, of finding solutions to climate change, of dealing with science and data. And it feels good to be part of that. And that's a lot of what we're doing here this evening of finding those bright areas, the things that we can do and teach about and take care of that are making our environment and our world a better place. So with that, I would like to hand this off to Ralph.
So I really like how you left that thought with us, Bob. That's that's very much how I feel as well. So to begin the second part, I again would want to reiterate that Dave Armstrong and Sarah Whiting's presentations are excellent and really deserve your attention as precursors to today's. Especially Sarah gave such a nice introduction, thanking all the people in our organization and others who helped her. I don't want to reiterate all that, but I'd like you to go check it out. What she had to say was great. And as Sarah said in her part two a month ago, protect the land to protect the water. So I'm going to organize the presentation sort of along that thought, where I'm going to begin with types of nature-based solutions that focus on the land and the kind of infiltration benefits that Bob just reviewed. And then the second part will be more examples where there's both land and water involved. The nature-based solutions are available at a range of scales, from very small to very large, and we need them all, but I'm going to start each section with the smaller ones and then move up in scale. And I'll give you examples of ones that have already been employed and a few that are envisioned. And when it's applicable, I'll try to point out when there's gray infrastructure incorporated. So first on the land-focused nature-based solutions. And Ryan, please advance the slides. I should be directing you to do that. Go on to the next one, please. There we go. Okay, next. Ryan is advancing my slides for me. So I'm going to start here with rain gardens. Rain gardens are very small. They often fit in a front yard or backyard. And here's one in Leominster at a friend of mine's house, Dick O'Brien's, in his front yard. This was installed about 15 years ago as part of a $1.5 million EPA 219 Clean Water Act grant. And there were over 60 installed in Leominster at that time. One of the impressive things is that this small rain garden collects all the water off of his roof. And in the big flood in Leominster in 2023, it filled up, but it didn't overflow, even though in his backyard, which is much lower, he had 37 inches of water in that flood. So it clearly was working. If you multiply this by many, they're very impactful. Next. And another type that Bob actually alluded to, you can call them meadows if you like, but they're also called pollinator gardens, is the work that's been done in Pepperell, led by the Invasives and Native Plant Advisory Council. Deb Fountain is the chair. And in this particular example, at Varnum Brook, they did some wonderful work. But before I go on to that, they've also produced a native plant guide that's really something that you want to look at if you're interested in maybe converting a part of your lawn into a meadow or a pollinator garden. Next. So here's a sign that says Pepperell Invasive Plant Committee at work, removing invasive plants, and you have to do it the right way and make sure that they don't just escape elsewhere. So there's a appropriate way to do it. Next. So what a beautiful outcome. I'd encourage you to consider reducing the size of your lawn and turn a portion of it into a pollinator garden, as we have here. It can greatly improve soil health. And healthy soils are biologically high functioning, supporting a biodiversity of plants, microorganisms, insects, and wildlife. Healthy soils store and filter water to mitigate both flooding and drought, as Bob mentioned. They capture and store carbon to help mitigate climate change, and they store and make available nutrients for plant growth. Healthy soils are much more resilient to the impacts of climatic extremes such as flooding or drought than degraded soils. And of course, healthy soils can provide nutritious, locally available food. And the things you mustn't do if you want healthy soils is disturb the soil too much by compacting it under heavy equipment, applying pesticides and herbicides. So please try to reduce or eliminate their use, and keep the ground covered rather than bare. Next. There are many benefits of urban trees, and they're kind of outlined in this diagram. Too many of our urban areas in places like Fitchburg, Leominster, Nashua, in our watershed, the urban tree canopy has disappeared. In older neighborhoods, particularly, trees have died, been cut down, not replaced, and it makes for a much hotter summer climate and also a really kind of a inhospitable winter climate because the streets can become like wind tunnels without those trees. Many trees are being planted, fortunately, by our state on private properties. Next. So take Leominster, the Greening the Gateway Cities program has already planted over the past 10 years over 3,300 trees, and all of those dots represent a tree that they've planted. They're all free. They're selected to be well suited for their site. The landowner simply has to agree to, allow them to grow. And they're not small trees, but they're good size, nice trees when they're planted. And if we move on, and that program is ongoing. If we go to the next slide, you can see that although it started later, there's already over 1,100 trees planted in Fitchburg, also in the more densely populated parts of the city. A lot more to do there. Next. The Department of Conservation and Recreation, which runs the Greening the Gateway Cities program, told me that they are planning a billboard campaign. So look for this or other similar kinds of billboards coming up, making the point that trees can greatly reduce the air temperatures. And I would say even by more than much more than 9 degrees, if you compare pavement temperatures to the temperatures under a shade tree, it can be 30 or 50 degrees different. So take advantage of this program, and if you don't live in a gateway city, it's still a good place to. You're still in a good place to plant trees if they're not there and they need to be, and to leave the better canopy trees alone and avoid just having, I don't know, a utility company come and cut them down because they think they're in the way of their wires or something like that. It can be legitimate, but I've seen an awful lot of nice trees get cut down for no apparent purpose. Moving up in scale, let's go to a commercial scale. In Devon's is actually the showcase in our watershed for nature-based solutions because they've implemented so many. And I'd like to start with a couple of commercial developments, 27 Jackson Road and King Street Pathway. Neil Angus, who's the director and land use administrator of the Devon's Enterprise Commission and who has led us around on several wonderful bus tours of the nature-based solutions in Devon's, he explained that 27 Jackson Road was one of the earlier adopters of low impact development around 2008, and it was done in phases through 2012. I'll show you a picture in a moment. Then the King Street Pathway campus was done much more recently. These these biofiltration islands and depaving and other integrated features promote infiltration, enhance biodiversity. They're appealing, and they eliminate the need for a lot of more heavily engineered solutions, such as detention basins, with great cost savings. Next. So here's 27 Jackson Road, next to where the former Mount Wachusett Community College building was. This design reduced the paving and piping while increasing the landscaped areas, which you can see in the foreground. Um, there are curb cuts that allow the water to flow off the pavement into these infiltration basins, resulting in significant cost savings, $32,000 here just in reduced paving and $68,000 in the unneeded stormwater structures. So really a great development. Next, the King Street Pathway is a 45-acre area with many commercial buildings that have been built and are now occupied. It was done in phases as well, but from about 2022 to the present, so a decade later than the previous one at Jackson Road. We saw both of them when we went on the tour. Next. And Neil Angus adds that seeing is believing, and that's the point of the nature-based solution tour there. The earlier biofiltration landscape islands, they were a model for others who said it wouldn't work. Same with the porous pavement. He goes on to say, we had real life examples to show engineers, developers, and property owners that it does work and it can look good and function better in the face of more frequent and intense storms, and it costs less. So the developers have really come to like it. Next. There's no one size fits all or single solution. All of these nature-based solutions work together as a system, combining with more traditional drainage systems as needed. The more nature-based solution options you implement at a single site, the more triple bottom line benefits you can achieve. That means economic, social, and environmental. So there's a lot of places in our watershed, not just in Devons, where there are large buildings and large parking lots, and these kinds of solutions can really help in all the ways that the co-benefits that Bob outlined. Next. An urban bioretention basin was installed by the city of Fitchburg in a block-long installation along a steep street in downtown Fitchburg. Weston and Sampson was the engineer working for the city under a municipal vulnerability preparedness grant, an MVP grant that the state issued. And it designed this set of bioretention basins to capture and filter stormwater runoff as part of a combined sewer overflow separation project. Instead of the runoff just running down that steep street into catch basins and then directly into the Nashua River, it gets filtered by the native plantings to help cleanse the water. And then it infiltrates into the subsoil beneath the basins. And you can see that in the two cross sections. One's looking right up the street, the one on the left, and the one on the right is a side view. So it infiltrates into the subsoil beneath the basins. This is an example of a nature-based solution that does incorporate an engineered solution as well, because they had to dig down and put in that crushed stone. And fortunately, there's permeable soil underneath it. It wouldn't work well if it was not permeable soil underneath. Next. So Nick Erickson, our Fitchburg's DPW commissioner, offered lessons learned from this. He said, because the uphill drainage system hadn't been completed when a large storm occurred shortly after the installation of this, the basins got washed out. So the project should have been sequenced better. And he said more mature plants should have been planted. But overall, this kind of an approach provides more benefit than a typical suburban rain garden because it filters much more runoff. And we have a lot of steep hills with catch basins in Fitchburg. So hopefully they'll do some more of this, and I believe they will. Next. Another slightly larger scale type of an effort is a pocket forest. This one's in Ayer. Pocket forests are also known as Miyawaki forests. They're about the size of a small yard, but they involve planting a large number, like hundreds, of native trees, shrubs, and forbs in that small area. This one's across the street from the Ayer Public Library and a railroad track and Route 2A, Main Street. It's in an urban neighborhood with no forests. Next. Here you can see people beginning to gather and planting the pocket forest in April 2023 under the direction of the BSC Group, the Regenerative Design Group, the Town of Ayer, and the Devon's Enterprise Commission. One of the best things about pocket forests is they often engage a large number of residents, and they come to feel invested in the forest, and over the time they see it grow and enjoy it. Next. So here you can see us gathering, um, and the plant materials. Somebody explained how we needed to do the work. And if you move to the next slide, um, it shows what the pocket forest looks like today, or last year, I should say. Um, so this was a couple years after it was planted. And the next slide shows what it's projected to. Oh, this is what it looked like last year. The next slide shows what it's projected to look like in 2029. The 9 got dropped off. And then the final one, 20, oops, yes, stop there. 2053. It'll look like a small forest. Now to the next slide. I had the just the wonderful opportunity to kneel across from Marion Stoddard as we worked together to plant this forest a couple years ago. And what a joy to do that. It's a great and educational project for the community. So they've done several others at Devon's and in Shirley. Um, and I hope that there'll be more of these in the future. Now moving to the more land and water focused nature-based solutions. Next. I'd like to begin with something that most of us know as water features, but I'm going to call them pocket wetlands. A pocket wetland can be created where there wasn't previously a wetland, and we know how important wetlands are. Bob and I each have one of these in our backyard, and in fact, he designed this one for ours. Fish have overwintered for 7 years now and reproduced in our water feature, which consists of 3 small ponds and streams in between them. Frogs lay their eggs, hatching into thousands of tadpoles. Tree frogs trill, salamanders, snails, and water snakes live there, and it hosts a variety of aquatic plants. It attracts butterflies and dragonflies. A snapping turtle came by on a walkabout, but it didn't stay because it realized it's too small. It's artificial. It requires some power and some maintenance, but it has become its own amazing small ecosystem. And I think it's definitely a nature-based solution, just in terms of how much biodiversity it's brought to our backyard. Next. Land conservation is really important as a nature-based solution. And a good example, a recent one, is Farwell Quarry in Harvard. It's nearly 30 acres. It's along Route 111, just about halfway between Route 2 and Harvard Center. And it has 600 feet of riparian frontage along Bowers Brook, which is a tributary of the Nonocoicus Brook in Ayer. It's got mixed hardwood forests, rocky outcrops, open fields, wetlands. And it's very fortunate, next, that the Harvard Conservation Trust was able to acquire this historic slate quarry property with local partners, including our Marion Stoddard Greenway program and the Nashua, Squanicook, and Nissitissit Wild and Scenic Rivers Stewardship Council. So protecting and connecting riparian areas along this brook that flows through both forested and well-developed areas is critical to protecting the water quality there and the fish and wildlife habitat that it supports. It's really a perfect example of a significant improvement to the land and water and mitigation of a lot of those problems that Sarah and so well described and that Bob touched upon as well. Next. So continuing on that same general theme, riparian buffers to protect greenways. They complete Marion Stoddard's vision of sparkling blue water with a ribbon of green. Riparian buffers filter pollutants from upland runoff and reduce flooding impacts. They provide cooling shade and corridors for wildlife, enhance microinvertebrates and microbial activity as well, both in the bottom of the stream, but also in the adjacent land. I'd urge you to let woody debris fall into the stream and remain there. It provides refugia for fish, turtles, and many other species. People, of course, benefit from enjoying these beautiful shorelines, and they increase property values and support local economies. Next. An example of the restoration of a riparian buffer is, again, happens to be at Devens. If you look at the little map on the left, um, it's just south of the Parker Charter School along Jackson Road, and on the other side of the soccer fields that used to be the parade grounds. So if you look on the right, that label, it's the area just below that you're going to see in these photographs. So it's an example of restoring rivers and streams. Next. So this particular portion of Willowbrook had been culverted by the military. There's the pipe that was restored in 2015 by removing the pipe section and creating a stream corridor for the water to flow down. A sinuous stream corridor, by the way. So as we go through these photos, you'll see the transition. Next. Stormwater runoff from the adjacent roads was disconnected and is now filtered prior to discharging to the brook. So there's improved water quality on this tributary of the Nashua River. The NRWA helped this project by providing supplemental riparian plantings through a previous grant. Next. And as the native trees and shrubs were added, it began to grow up, and actually it's been allowed to regenerate naturally, so it's slowly maturing into a more forested corridor. Devens received a Mass ECAN, that stands for Ecosystem Climate Adaptation Network, Climate Ambassador Award to share Devens nature-based solution projects with other communities, and this link to their entire story map with 16 examples of nature-based solutions will be in the resources that we provide to you. So I highly encourage you to go check out there are a bunch of 1-minute beautiful videos, which unfortunately, when we tried to share them as a part of this show, it just didn't work. So we're doing it this way instead. And taking a last page from the topic of riparian buffers, I recently came across this approach, which apparently is taking off in New York State, just to our west. And that is a productive riparian buffers, where at this location in the Hudson Valley, just to the west of the Berkshires, Arthur's Point Farm, they've planted this riparian corridor with hickory, hazelnut, walnut, other food plants, and herbs. And the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation actually provides landowners in the Hudson River estuary free trees from the state's tree nursery for planting in riparian areas along creeks and streams. They call it Trees for Tribs. And this program, you get a bag of 25 young bare root trees. The landowners just have to promise to plant the tree in a riparian area and care for it until they're established. So perhaps we should consider emulating this program here. I love the idea of food trees along a riparian corridor where they weren't present before. It's also called agroforestry. And there's so much about agriculture that I could talk about, but there's not that many examples of nature-based solutions that I can offer at this point. All right, so next slide, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the removal of dams. the Nashua River Watershed Association has a policy that we educate people about dam removal, but we are not going to advocate for it unless the landowner has decided that they want to remove the dam. And that was the case here. The Whitney Pond Dam was built in 1835 on the Whitman River in South Ashburnham. The dam powered a variety of industries there, including what became in the 1980s the longest running furniture factory in Ashburnham. When it finally closed its doors in the late 1950s, the town of Ashburnham eventually took ownership of the dam, and over the years, the dam began to degrade and no longer served any function. And next, as a result of that, the public safety risks and the financial burden to repair, maintain, and inspect it, the town of Ashburnham decided in 2018 to remove the dam. And in 2021, the Mass Division of Ecological Restoration identified this dam removal as a priority project, meaning the project would bring significant ecological and community benefits to the Commonwealth. So the dam was officially removed over a 3-month construction period last summer, with restoration work occurring immediately afterwards in the fall. So here you can see that the removal and the restoration beginning. Next. The Whitman River is a tributary to the Nashua River and a cold water fish resource, meaning it provides critical habitat for cold water fish species like the native eastern brook trout. Removing the dam has reconnected 10.5 miles of river habitat, restoring free-flowing conditions and allowing fish and other aquatic organisms to move freely along the river again. Next. So the former impoundment is transitioning to a restored emergent wetland, intersected by the restored channel of the Whitman River. The area was revegetated both through natural regeneration of the seed bank and through native tree and shrub plantings installed by the contractors. And I thought Trout Unlimited added something important, that removal of this dam is restoring natural sediment transport and river channel processes, as well as reducing the risk of flooding, cost of maintenance, and the native habitat. It improves water quality and temperature regimes, and it's reestablishing fish passage and access to upstream and downstream habitat. Next. Bob did a good job of emphasizing the importance of forests. Protecting and restoring our forests, including the adjacent wetlands and floodplains, is perhaps the most impactful of all the nature-based solutions available to us here in this watershed, and it's generally done on a larger scale. This quote, I think, from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which Sarah did such a good job of explaining their very significant role around the world, is, quote, "Our planet's future climate is inextricably tied to the future of its forests." To me, all forests are important, but I'm personally focused on protecting late successional and old growth forests, which hold so much value. We need more wildlands. Rewilding can enable wildlands to come into being. So that's why mature forests also deserve to be protected to a much greater extent. We only have about 2% of our state's forests that are designated explicitly as wildlands. That needs to be increased. Next. There's so many reasons to preserve forests: the open space, the nature, wildlife, biodiversity, mitigating flooding, drought, urban heat, erosion, noise, enhance water, and air quality. Sequester and store carbon, as Bob said, in vegetation and particularly in soil. Most of the carbon in the forest is in the soil in the Northeast. Provide us with forest products, recreation, all the aesthetic and spiritual values. Many of our greenways are forested, so let's move on to greenways. Next. Greenway properties are defined as parcels that fall within 300 feet of rivers, tributaries, and headwaters within the Natural River watershed. To date, about 200 miles of greenway have been protected, and this map shows where the greenways are, largely along the main stem over on the right-hand side of the map. A lot of them in the southern portion of the watershed, which, as Sarah explained, is really functionally disconnected from the rest of the watershed because of interbasin transfer from the Quabbin to the Wachusett and then east into the Boston metropolitan area. But there's a lot of other greenways that you can see there. And we're working on continually expanding this. And actually, the NRWA is in the process of updating our maps and statistics to include all perennial waterways across the watershed. So once they're included, there'll be a lot more green in this map. Here's an interesting idea. It hasn't yet been fully implemented, but it's going hopefully to be done. And I heard that our mayor in Fitchburg talked about this today. Restore the natural hydrology and slow the flow with a floodable park. As the cross-section shows, people standing in a sports park, and this is what Coolidge Park is. It's a sports park, largely in a soccer field, say, that can be flooded. And then when the floodwaters recede, it can be used again as a park. There's a 50% design completed for this park. Next. Based on their conceptual design, Weston and Sampson estimate the capacity of the floodable basin at 800,000 gallons. It's just to the left of the Falula Brook, which is upstream of the John Fitch Highway flood zone. So it's an exciting concept, and I hope it does get implemented. Next. Another municipal project of a significant scale was done by the city of Leominster at the Granite Street Stormwater Park. You might be able to notice on the left-hand side, there's a residential neighborhood that's ringed by dashed red lines. That's about a 20-acre medium density residential neighborhood, and there's also about a mile of Granite Street itself. All of the stormwater from those areas was discharged untreated into Monusnock Brook, which runs through the center of Leominster, and which flooded so badly in the big storm a couple of years ago. It just went into a catch basin untreated. So under an EPA 319 grant, at a cost of a little over $300,000, a small portion of which was provided by the NRWA, a stormwater park was put in, which was conceived of by Mike Clark and Roger Brooks, who are both low impact development enthusiasts. Next. What they did was they installed a series of infiltration basins, a rain garden, and a constructed wetland, the cross section of which is on the right, to receive those stormwaters, treat them, and then discharge to Monusnock Brook. Next. Here it is during construction and after construction. And finally, the next slide. It's what it looked like when I visited it year before last. Really beautiful. John Roseberry of Leominster's DPW told me that though it was designed to handle a 100-year flood, and that meant about 5 inches of rain, it was overwhelmed by the September 2023 flood, 11 inches of rain in 6 hours or so, which caused the stormwater to bypass this set of features. He said the piping would have had to have been greatly upgraded to handle such an intense storm. So that was probably not feasible, but it's there. It'll work for most storms and greatly benefit the hydrology and ecology of the area. It's right across the street from the Leominster High School. Next. I hope you got a chance to hear Ben Goldfarm's recent NRW webinar entitled, Damn It, Partnering with Beavers to Heal the Planet. Let's take a page from beavers. Next. So this slide shows a potential flood mitigation in Falula Brook subbasin in Fitchburg, which is upstream of the John Fitch Highway commercial area that has flooded so badly. There's two large wetlands that are both municipally owned, Greens Pond and Putnam's Pond, or Putts Pond, as most people call it, with a 10 square mile basin upstream that's mostly forested. You can see it outlined in red. So if those existing wetlands, both of which have dams that no longer function for their original purpose, I believe Greens Pond was an ice pond at one time for, selling ice to people before refrigeration. If those dams could be slightly taken down and replaced with a beaver dam analog called a leaky dam, and that you can see that in that lower right-hand corner. What are gabion baskets? They're wire cages filled with crushed stone that can be piled up as seen in that picture. And I found from some research that gabion baskets have been used widely in Japan, South Korea, and China as for this very purpose. When I brought it up to the city officials during our MVP site visit at this location, they seemed amenable to at least exploring this approach. It could be a good pilot. If it were deployed here at Greens Pond and Putts Pond, they could store as much as 30 million gallons. Remember, the, the floodable park was 800,000, 30 million gallons of stormwater and release it more slowly, significantly mitigating the downstream flooding of John Fitch Highway. And I've located, with the help of some of the many people that have helped me with this presentation, there's a place in Leominster that could, where the same thing could be done potentially. Former Smith Pond. Now I'd like to look for a little while at culverts. And Pepperell has a great example, courtesy of Paula Terrassi, the conservation administrator for the town of Pepperell. Sucker Brook crosses Heald Street, where in the lower part of that yellow area, called Heald Street Culvert, this is all just west of downtown East Pepperell. And this Sucker Brook Continuity Restoration Project included the replacement of the Heald Street culvert. Next. The first photo shows the 36-inch corrugated metal pipe that was failing the previous culvert. The second photo is the replacement 16-foot wide concrete three-sided culvert that meets the mass stream crossing standards. And it was precast. So there's an example of a combination of an engineered product, but it's very much a nature-based solution because once installed, the brook is now free flowing through the open bottom of the culvert. This was initiated in 2021 as part of this restoration project and completed in 2023. The concrete structure was necessary because Hill Street crosses over Sucker Brook at this location. Next. Oh, you're already there. So this shows the wing walls and bridge being cast and placed, and on the right, the completed culvert. Paula said this was very challenging because they had water, sewer, and gas lines in the road, which had to be placed across a temporary bridge to enable this culvert to be established. When all was said and done, the construction phase, which didn't include the actual covered structure, was approximately 1.2 million. So culvert replacements can be very expensive, but this one was exacerbated by the fact that it had those utility lines that had to be continuously available. She credits her team, including Squanitissit chapter of Trout Unlimited, Town of Pepperell, the NRWA, Neshoba Conservation Trust, and their incredible partners at the Mass Division of Ecological Restoration. And we'll provide more information in our resources about this particular nature-based solution. We have a very active program of assessing culverts, which is very important uh, because you need to be able to prioritize which ones to focus on, and that's what our culvert assessment program enables. We've done over 700, I believe, culvert assessments. Next. So while there are many more types of nature-based solutions than I had time to show you, I hope I've conveyed that there are so many ways to employ them to protect, restore, and create our watersheds, precious rivers, streams, and landscapes. On land to promote infiltration, slow the flow, mitigate flooding, reduce drought. On land and water in riparian buffers, rivers and streams, and in headwaters for all the reasons that I've described, and at a range of scales. They're really making a difference. And individuals can do little things at home. So I encourage you to consider that. And individuals working together can do medium scale things, certainly, also. By the way, pay attention to votes coming up in your town or city uh, and make your voices heard. There's so many resources available that we will be providing you um, to help envision, design, and implement nature-based solutions, whether you're an individual, a business, a municipality, and in collaboration with partners. Collaboration is key. And I'll just close with one thing. Nature is a community to which we belong, not a commodity for us to exploit. So let's work with nature. Thank you.